It's a flat fee usually, depending on the type of permit. So they have different, costs according to the kind of permit you're getting. But for residential, for a single family home, everything keeps going up higher and higher. But I think it's around $300 or $400 for most jurisdictions. That's something you want to, learn at the beginning. You might not want to spend, exorbitant amount of money for your septic. And water is usually not a big deal because usually water lines can run long distance. Power sometimes is a big deal though. So if your Edison connection is far away, it can be really expensive to bring Edison to your building site. And so that's something that you might want to find out early on.
Hi, everybody. Jose Luis Morales here. Welcome back to another episode of the Morales Group Show. Today, we've got a very special guest. His name is Marc Whitman. Marc is a local architect here in Ventura County. And today, Marc is going to be explaining to us the building permit process for building a house. So he's going to take us from what is step 1 to what is step Z, which is the finished product. Welcome to the show, Marc. How are you?
I'm good. Good to be here.
Good. Thank you so much for taking this on. So I wanted to have you on the show because a lot of clients ask me, or especially with prices going up or even interest rates going up, some clients ask me like, hey, look, how do I add on to my house? Some clients are looking at vacant land pieces of property and are thinking like, well, maybe it may be cheaper for me to just build something from scratch instead of buying something at some of these prices. So I wanted just to bring you on so that way you can explain what the building permit process looks like from an architect's perspective. Now, I think you have a unique perspective because you're also a licensed contractor as well too. So I think that allows you to give like a very good perspective on what the building process is. But before we get into the show, I just wanted to ask for our viewers out there who don't know who you are, who is Marc Whitman and how did you get involved in this world of architecture and construction?
Yeah, well, I've been doing this, I think, almost 40 years now. Um, Decided to be an architect when I was in high school. Went to architecture school. You had to go to what they call a certified architecture school to get your license with. So I went to Arizona State University, and then started working, for other architects back in the 80s was when I graduated from school. And then I started practicing in around 1985. And so I've been doing this for a while. Didn't get my license till I was in 1989, but I was doing residential projects you can do without licenses.
Mm-hmm.
And then now with the license, you can do commercial projects. And I think a lot of jurisdictions want architect's license for complicated residential projects as well. And so I'm here in Ojai. Grew up here as a kid and kind of came back and settled in, raised my family here, and built my own house and enjoying a great lifestyle with my architect. I love doing the architecture. I think it's kind of it's so fascinating to be able to come up with ideas out of your head and sketch them on paper, and then see them come to fruition. And physicality is kind of like it's magic to me. That this is like started with these little sparks in your brain, and then now it's this thing that's actually here in our physical world. And so I love being creative and artistic. I think our spaces that we live in affect us. They have an effect on our
Mood.
yeah, and it can change us
Energy.
too.
Yeah.
Yeah, it can change. It can change the way you think and feel about life. If you're in a space that feels good and is healing and nurturing, it can change the way you feel on a daily basis. And so, anyway, so back to your question on starting out and building a house from scratch and what that involves. I'll usually get a client. I do projects myself too, but usually have a client who says, "Hey, I want to build a house. I'd like you to do it." So we'll have a meeting. Usually, the first thing is on site, and
Mm-hmm.
so we'll get out to the site, and the site parameters kind of determine, and the client's program determines how the design will turn out. But I'll get the client to sign a contract, and then we'll do some research first, though. on the site, and the different jurisdictions have different code requirements, setbacks, and there might be like soils issues. We'll maybe order a soils report to begin with, just to make sure the soils and geological is okay. Sometimes we've had projects where we found an earthquake fault going right through where we wanted to build this house, and so we wait a second, we gotta change our plans here before. So you want to kind of cross those bridges before you get too deep into a design. Make sure that the local planning is usually our first stop as well. So once we have like a design kind of sketched out on a real rough basis, we'll take it down and try to show it to the planning department, whichever wherever that one might be, and get their feedback on the design. And so they'll say, they might give us some insight. Oh, wait a second, like here in Ojai, if it's 2 stories, you have to go through a planning commission. They want to review a 2-story house here in the city of Ojai. The county of Ventura doesn't have that kind of requirement, but the city does, and so we'll have to do a whole planning submittal. And they usually want to see, sometimes we'll have to order a survey that will go along, with the project, and they'll want to see the complete design to go, through a planning approval process. And that's the same case with there's discretionary permits, which was what we're talking about, and undiscretionary. Undiscretionary is usually over the counter, although that's very rare these days. It used to be you can go over the counter and get a permit, planning permit, but now they take the project in, they review it, and they come back with comments. Sometimes they'll say, "Wait a second, you're encroaching into this oak tree." So oak trees are a big deal in this area. We want you to move the house away from this oak tree, or they'll have some comments and tell you to do some things differently. And then for the discretionary projects, they'll sometimes say, "Oh, we don't like the height of that. You're looking right at your neighbor's backyard, and we want you to move, the house to the other side of the property," or something like that. There'll be things we'll need to deal with the planning department. And but then once we're through that phase, we'll start what we call preliminary design and get into some of the consultants that we hire, like a structural engineer, mostly on all our projects. And so a structural engineer will give us feedback on the structure, and then we're a lot of our projects will hire mechanical engineers too. Figure out the energy calcs. That we call Title 24 is a California code for meeting energy requirements for a project. And so I'm a big proponent of passive design. So whenever I'm designing, I'll keep in mind, the sun angles and shading, and there's good orientation to your windows. Like usually your south is like good light and good. That's a good orientation. But on a west facing, especially here in Ojai, where we have our cooling loads are our biggest issue, heat in the summer. We'll try to avoid west facing glass. And so when I'm designing a house, I'll say, don't put your windows there. Put them over on this side or north, facing the views, or if we have to do a west facing window, we'll say, okay, well, let's do some really deep overhangs over here to protect those windows. And then airflow through the building, and how natural ventilation will help cool the house and keep it comfortable. And so you can minimize your energy costs of air conditioning loads and heating loads by doing this what we call passive solar design. And so I'll do that on most all my projects.
Let's rewind a little bit back to some of the earlier stuff that you said. So
Yeah.
at the beginning, you said that you would do an on-site consultation. And originally you said, and you even gave an example of a house that had an earthquake fault line running right into the property. So if
Right.
somebody's considering potentially building a house and or even buying a piece of land, they should probably do a soils report at some point, or get a soils report along with the sale, because it sounds like the soils report is going to tell you if there's something dramatically wrong with the current soil. It's also going to tell you potentially how much grading you're potentially going to need or not. It's probably going to tell you things as to that effect. Or let me ask it this way: what does a soil report tell you?
Well, there's soils and there's geological. So the geological will tell us about the earthquake faults, but also if there's like unstable soil. So if it's like in a slide area or something like that. The soils will tell us what the characteristics is of the soil. So there's good soil to build on, and there's bad soil to build on. So if it's bad, it's not impossible to build on, but it just creates maybe like some extra grading. So most all projects we have to recompact the earth. We'll pull up the dirt from underneath where the building pad is and put it back down and compact it in. And so the soils report will tell us how deep we need to go with that recompaction. Sometimes it's only 2 feet, and sometimes it's 4 feet, and so that it doesn't. Grading is not a big cost with the overall package, but it is something to consider.
And all of this would be factored into the plans that you submit to the city basically once you have the soils report. Does the city or the county require a copy of the soils report when approving the plans, or is that not a requirement?
It's a requirement for anything over 1 story or 1,000 square feet. It's required. But a lot of times I'll tell my clients, hey, it's not required, but it might tell you if you don't do a soils report, they make you go to worst case scenario. So you have to do extra big and deep footings and extra steel in the foundation, and that's going to cost you probably more than a soils report. And so what do what do you want to do? You want to spend money here or there, and so it does it does pay for itself, even though it wouldn't be required, but I would recommend it for most of my projects.
Okay. And then you said something about a survey. What is a survey?
Well, yeah. So if you have a vacant lot or even a remodel, and you need to have something that would show us the topography of the site and also where the property lines are, and they would tell us if there's any easements going through the property.
Mhm.
So you might say, oh, I want to do a room addition here. Well, the survey would say, no, you can't do it there. There's an easement running along that property line that it's you got some utilities or the neighbor has a access easement or something like that you wouldn't know unless you had a survey and someone tell you that information.
Okay. So let's say that you have this information. Let's say that the client hires you. You go down to the city or the planning commission. Is planning the first step? And then there you kind of run the project by them. You kind of tell them, like, hey, look, this is kind of what we were visualizing. And then
Yeah,
they would take a look at their zoning and tell you, yes, this is possible, or no, that's not possible, right?
yeah, correct. Yeah, usually we'll have a sketchy plan. We'll try to keep it loose at the beginning in case we run into some pitfalls. Some we won't put a lot of work into those initial plans, but then we'll have something to take down to show the county or the city what our intentions are, and then they would like I said, sometimes they'll take the project in and they'll give us back a response in writing, or sometimes they'll just tell us that information over the counter. But we try to do that in most all projects. Sometimes projects are kind of like no brainers, and we kind of know that things are going to work out, and we don't do that. But we try to do that in most of our projects just to make sure we're in the right direction.
So if there's any sort of doubt that maybe the project will work or maybe it won't, that's the first step, to draw out like a basic sketch of the plans to submit to planning.
Right.
Um, how reliable is that information from, like, let's say that they say, yes, we like it. Is that like, does that mean that they're 100% approved? Or does that mean that they're just basically telling you, bring us more information, or these are the corrections that we want you to fix? Uh,
Yeah, I've had projects where they've told us over the counter, yeah, it looks good, but then you come back with the actual submittal and they go, oh, well, we didn't realize this, we didn't realize that. And they'll change their mind about it, and so there would be a wasted, extra effort to produce those plans. And they don't take there is that's rare. Most of the time, they'll give us the good information um, and some that we can hang our hat on to before we invest all that money in the doing the complete plans.
How long does it take to just like do a sketch like for a typical architect? Obviously, it depends on how busy they are, but are we talking about like a month period, like a couple of weeks, 6 months to do the first draft? And then also like what are some of these different like architectural costs associated with it? Like meaning like let's say you do the first sketch, let's say that they give you the green light, and then you do the actual plans that they suggested. What does that look like?
Um, yeah, that every architect is different, and so but I'll I do a lot of these initial sketches by hand. I'm an old school guy. I have my several draftsmen here in my office who take my sketches and work convert them to the computerized drawings. But I'll start off with a freehand, or it'll be to scale and all that. But freehand drawings that I do 3-dimensional sketches that go along with that, so the client can see what he's getting and see the project in 3 dimension. Um, and then for a simple project, that might cost like $1,000 to do something like that. As it gets more complicated, it'll be more. But it takes me. I charge. I forget what I'm charging these days because costs keep going up. But $190 an hour, I think, is my rate right now. And so yeah, it would take me less than 5 hours to sketch up a rough idea of what when I hear what my clients are telling me, then I'll come back with a sketch. Go, this is what I'm interpreting, what you're saying, and it's my role to get into my client's head as much as possible. So I say, hey, maybe some pictures. Why don't you send me some pictures out of magazines or off the internet, so I can get into their head, the best I can, and understand what their desires are. Because I'm providing a service, although I have my style and my way of doing things. I realize I'm in the service industry, and I'm providing a service to create this dream home for my clients, and so I'm getting as close as to what their dream home, I'm trying to think of what their dream home is the best I can.
And then let's say that you submit, let's say that they see your sketch, they say, okay, bring us the next the set of plans now. At that point, is the structural engineer involved and the mechanical engineer involved at that point, or does it have to go through planning first, and once planning approves it, then it goes to building a safety, and then it's approved at building a safety, or how does that look like?
Yeah, usually for residential projects, maybe for the commercial project, we'd get the consultants in earlier to make sure. But usually on residential projects, we'll have an understanding of how the mechanical systems are going to work, and we'll have that kind of designed into the project to begin with. And so we won't get them involved until after the planning approval. But then once we get the planning approval, we'll do a set of what we call preliminary plans that we submit to the engineers, get proposals. Usually we'll get competitive bidding on certain things, and come back, with a selected consultant.
How long does the planning approval typically take? And obviously, for some of the viewers out there that are not in California or not in Ojai, this obviously I think varies city by city, and it varies county by county and state by state. This is more specifically towards California and Ojai, even specifically. How long does that process usually take? And what does that process look like? Do I submit plans, and then they review them, then they come back to me with corrections? Do I just submit plans the first time? And then how do I make it so that like I minimize the amount of corrections that are needed? Like uh are there times where you can just submit the plan on the first try and they're like, oh man, you nailed it, they're approved? Or does it usually take back some corrections?
Yeah, both. So if it's a simple project and there's not a lot of issues, then yeah, the planners will approve it without corrections. And that usually depends on the jurisdictions. Now some are getting slower and slower. Like I said, I've been doing this almost 40 years now, and it's like a completely different world now. But like I would say like a month for them to come back with corrections or an approval of the planning. And then usually it's faster the second time you submit, like a couple weeks or so. But sometimes if it's a real simple project, like in the city of Ojai, we're small here, they'll still do it over the counter, and so you can take it in there and they'll say, oh, this doesn't need to go through planning. We can just approve this right now, and they'll give you a planning approval over the counter like that. But I know like County Ventura, you actually do a submittal. We're doing it electronically now, so you just do it on your computer and submit it to them, and then you wait and wait. There's usually a lot of waiting, and so
How important is it to have an architect that actually has a relationship with the city that you're dealing with? Meaning, like, I'm imagining that if you have an architect that has a relationship, he already almost knows what the city expects as it relates to certain things because they've done previous projects before, as opposed to maybe somebody who is new to that city or doesn't have the relationships. It may take them a couple more times to basically get the get it approved through planning.
yeah. Every department's different, and so unless you know what they're looking for, it might someone who's not familiar with our local codes and issues. There's all kinds of other issues that I'm not mentioning that if they're not familiar with those kind of things, then it would take them longer and it'd be more trial and error for them. Um, whereas I've been doing, like I said, for almost 40 years, and so I kind of know what they're looking for off the get go, and so we'll know that what will work and what won't.
Like, let's say that a homeowner's trying to get permits, and let's say that they, for whatever reason, decided to draft something up themselves for whatever reason. I don't know if that's even possible. Like, how do you find out what the city's looking for? Meaning, like, what they typically look for? Is there, like, what is that called? Is there like a book? Is there like codes?
Yeah. It's the planning ordinance usually what it's called, and so it's online. And so you can search online, and sometimes I'll just Google and setback for city of Ojai, and they'll have these little Google code um, sites that will tell what the setbacks is. Or sometimes you have to go into the city ordinance itself, and they're kind of long and hard to find the right thing sometimes. But if you know where you're looking for, you can find that. But yeah.
What are some of the other things that are important that you would Google basically to, if you're not familiar with it? Like setbacks would be one of them, right? What would be
Yeah.
other things that you would potentially look up if you weren't familiar with the city?
Well, there's also the site density. So if you have a small lot in town, they'll say you can only build 30% of your space, or that's an example. So every zone is different, and things like that, and they'll have other restrictions that will come up in the zoning ordinance, like number of parking spaces you need, and and what else would your height limits. And there's exemptions too that are in there. So they'll say, oh, we can go over a certain height if your roof pitch is steep, and like County Ventura has an average roof height from the what they call the plate line at the top of the wall to the top of the roof. That's their height limit, and so that's different in the County of Ventura as it compared to other places. So other places will say, no, your height limit is at your roof peak, and then sometimes they'll allow overhangs into the setbacks, and so that'll show up in the ordinance as well.
Okay. And site density, what does that actually mean? Like site density, it just means like how much can you build? It just means like what percentage of it is usable, or
Yeah. So usually it's how much you can how much of the site you can cover with your foundation, and then you usually can go up 2 stories from that. But some areas have like what they call floor area ratios, and so that they'll want to see you can't have you know you can't have so much square footage compared to the site size, and so it's different according to the zones and different cities and ordinances.
You'll have different regulations. Okay. And
Yeah.
then in the planning process, like let's say that the property doesn't have a water meter, doesn't have an electric or a gas meter, or doesn't have maybe not the connections to that. Is that
Uh,
something that's designed in the initial process? And is that something that maybe like the right person could tell them, hey, look, this piece of land, it's going to take you like, you're gonna have to bring the water from down there, and to bring it from down there, it's gonna be up here, and you're probably looking at like 200,000-300,000. So it may not be worth it at that point. Is that something
yeah.
that is addressed at very early on?
Yeah. And so that would be part of our research. I didn't mention that, but we call it pre-design. And so when we get hired by, like, we sign a contract, the first thing we do is go through this pre-design checklist, and we determine all those different things. There might be, it might not even be on sewer. You need a septic system, which the soils engineer would address that. And so like some sites gets kind of tricky with a septic system.
Yeah.
And so that's something you want to learn at the beginning, because you might not want to spend exorbitant amount of money for your septic. And bring water is usually not a big deal, because usually water lines can run a long distance. Power sometimes is a big deal though. So if your Edison connection is far away, it can be really expensive to bring Edison to your building site. And so that's something that you might want to find out early on.
What are some of the other things that we haven't covered that are in the pre-design checklist?
Well, fire department, that's a big one. Usually, they want to have access to the site. If it's a regular city lot, it's not a big deal, but they want to see a fire hydrant nearby. And so we have to, usually there is one, but if there isn't, then that becomes an issue. And sometimes they say, well, if you do sprinkler system in the house, that you can get away with not doing the fire hydrant. But these days in Ojai, sprinkler systems are kind of on most of all our projects. We're required to do a fire sprinkler system in the home, which
Mm-hmm.
it's $4 or $5 a square foot, which is, I think, money well spent, to protect your home. But the other issues that you might run into, we talked about the utilities. Gas is usually another one, but your communications is another one. And so you kind of go through and say, usually they're all on one pole, and so it's not a big deal, or the gas
Mm-hmm.
meter is there on most cases. But if you don't have a water meter, applying for a new water meter, sometimes there's moratoriums on that. Like here in Ohio, there was, up until recently, we were in that drought, and they were restricting. In some jurisdictions, they weren't allowing, water meters, and so without water, you can't do anything. And so that's an important issue for
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
Are there typically costs to review the first sketch, or do the costs start when you submit the plans to the planning department, or when do the costs with the city actually typically start?
Yeah, for a lot of people do over-the-counter consultants without charging. But once you submit plans formally, they'll
That's
start
when
charging you. Yeah, that's when
that's
they
when the
start.
city starts. And what do those fees typically look like for like a traditional house with the city, not with you guys, but with the city? What does that typically look like? Are we talking about like or how are those usually done? Is it like a price per square foot? Is it just like a flat fee? What i- is it a
It's a
cost per
flat
unit?
fee.
Flat fee?
It's a flat fee usually, depending on the type of permit. So
Mhm.
they have different costs according to the what kind of permit you're getting. But for residential, for a single family home, everything keeps going up higher and higher. But I think it's around $300 or $400 for for most jurisdictions. Excuse me, most
Mhm.
jurisdictions charge about $300 or $400 for the planning submittal, and then for the permit. Yeah, it's the same for usually it's just one cost for that, for the
What does
submittal.
it mean to have planning approval? What does that mean?
Well, actually, the legal term is entitlements, and so for all our projects, you want to have you get your entitlements which means you're allowed to build a project according to the planning department. I mean, barring, the other issues we talked about, structural and utilities and all that. But basically, the government is saying we are giving you permission to build your project. And you're meeting all the zoning ordinances, and you've gone through the process, and they finally give you your entitlements. And those usually, you can hold on to those for a certain amount of time before they expire. And so you can get that first and then kind of, say, okay, well, let's save up our money or whatever before we build our house. And so at least we know we can build the house. And, as long as we have the other things on the checklist done.
How long are entitlements usually good for? Is it like 12 months, 2 years, three
Yeah,
years?
usually, yeah, 12 months, but then they give you extensions. And so
Okay.
if you can say, well, we just didn't have the financing, they'll usually give you about 3 or 4 years, sometimes more, with extensions,
Yeah.
um, depending on the jurisdiction.
And then what is the difference between like planning approval or let me ask you this. What happens after you receive planning approval? Let's say that you want to continue moving forward. Does planning approval mean that it's ready to build, or does that mean that you have to take it to a different department?
Yeah, you need your building permits that's usually building and safety. It's a whole
Mhm.
nother department, and they check, for the engineering and all the other code requirements. But then there's a lot of other things that, besides the building being approved, if you're on septic, you need the environmental health to approve the septic system. The fire department is a separate approval as well, and so you'll need their sign off on all projects. And usually they're like for a city lot, they would require a fire flow on a water
Mhm.
on your local hydrant as well. So that's another requirement. They want to have that tested and say you have your, usually it's like 500 gallons per minute fire flow on that hydrant. If not, then you have to maybe do sprinklers. And so there's ways around it, but that's part of the fire approval.
Okay. So it's basically just more in depth. Now, is there a chance that the planning department could say, hey, look, you're allowed to build this, and then the building department say, no, you're not allowed to build this? Or will the building department just say, you're allowed to build it, but you have to build it this way? Or I guess what's the major difference between the planning and the building department?
Yeah, the planning is kind of telling you the size and saying you're allowed to build this design that you submitted, and we have no issues with that. The building department is building codes. You have to meet. You can build that building as long as you meet all the building codes, and so it's pretty straightforward. And it's, there's not a lot of, oh, we don't, there's not a lot of indiscretion there. That is pretty, it's cut and dry. Let me put it that way.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. How long does the building department take? And how long does the planning department usually take?
Well,
Like
again,
what are
every jurisdiction, they're all
jurisdiction?
different. And so, thank you. Like the city of Ojai, they'll tell us, sometimes they'll give us, like I said, over the counter permits. And then their first plan check, once you submit all the documents, all the reports and everything, they'll, they'll give us 10 working days right now. And so they have a really good turnaround. And then usually there's corrections. That's their job, is to mark it up and say, where's this, where's that? We think you should do this differently. And then once you submit for the second time, they say 5 days. And so I would say they're, from all the jurisdictions I'm working with, they're the best. County Ventura and City Ventura, they're not so fast. And so they got a huge workload and people coming and going, and they have a lot of staff issues and things
Yeah.
like that, and they're trying to catch up. I think they're doing their best to stay on top of it, but it takes much longer.
What does much longer mean? Are we talking about like years potentially?
No, not
Six
years. I would say
months, six
months.
months?
Months.
Yeah.
Yeah, months. Yeah. So right now, like in the city of Ventura and county of Ventura, it might take months to get your planning approval once you submit that. And then once you submit your building, I would say 3 months, 4 months to get the building permit.
And that's assuming you have a good architect, right? Meaning, like, if you have an architect that they give him the corrections and for whatever reason he doesn't make the right correction, then they'll kick it back. And every time there's corrections, it takes time for them to review it. So if it takes them 10 days to review the project, not bad. But if it takes them 3 months to review the corrections, it's basically, and the person keeps doing corrections. Let's say he goes back and forth 5 times with them. That's already like 15 months right there, potentially, just
Yeah,
in
that's
corrections.
that's correct. That's correct. So that 3 or 4 months was like one set of corrections, and so um, that if you did have a lot of problems with the county of Ventura, they're very peculiar about their and specific about their engineering plan check. If you're not used to that, if your structural engineer is not used to their method, um, they can give your structural engineer a real hard time. And
What
so
does that mean? They're very specific about that.
well, just the certain values that are used in calculating. Um, some engineers, they have their own method of calculating things, and so unless they do it in their way, it's like a specific way of calculating, then they can have a really hard time.
And how do you know this, that a city has these types of specific ways of calculating certain things? Is it just you find out by dealing with them the first time, or is that like in their website where it says, hey, look, this is the actual method that we use for calculating these weight distributions or whatever?
Yeah, no,
It's almost
there's
like
no.
just dealing with them.
Yeah, it's just having experience with them. I think but
So,
once you've been through them a few times, and they're you know what to expect.
okay. And then, so in the building process, you said that there's a fire department. I think you said engineer potentially. There's structural. There's mechanical. Anything else in the building department? The fire flow, or what are some of the other things in that department?
Well, yeah, you'll need to do usually electrical plan, lighting plan, and there's code requirements there. um, well, our whole list of drawings, and they have a required, basic list of drawings. The site plan. You need to show where the building is going on site, and then you go into the floor plan and elevations and cross sections. There's some reflected ceiling plan. There's the interior elevations that we'll do. That's not usually a code requirement, but then the electrical plan, there's energy requirements for lighting that you need to spell out. There's what else is there? Roof plan, your roofing, which
Mhm.
is maybe not so important for the building department, but for making sure your project doesn't leak. Having a really good architect doing really good roof plan, roof details, and so that's actually 90%. That's what I've been told. 90% of lawsuits against architects are from water intrusion, not
Mhm.
just from the roofs, but from doors and windows and things like that. So that's something I take great care, and I don't like getting calls. Hey, we got a leaky something here. So
That makes sense. Okay.
yeah.
And then, what are some of the mistakes that you see like people make as it relates to like the getting permits for building a house?
Um, well, it's like bad design. Sometimes I look at sometimes if you design it yourself, you can make some big glaring mistakes. There's a certain aesthetics how a project balances out in its composition. If it has interest, rhythm and they say it's like frozen music. So it's you're kind of following the same principles as a composer would, and when you're designing, having a certain flow and balance, verticals elements as balancing out the horizontal elements, and there's just a lot that goes into creating a composition that really clicks and feels good, and also inside as well.
Mhm.
So you don't have spaces that are you know you want to feel good, and you can have some big spaces, but you want to complement that with intimate spaces that are inside. But then going back to my passive solar design, sometimes people have their best views to the west, and so let's have a big west window, um, and with no protection. And so in the afternoon, it just cooks and it just becomes uninhabitable. And end up covering up your beautiful view with curtains. so, so things like that.
Yeah. As it relates to bad design, like here's kind of what I've heard, that some of the architects don't actually take into account like the construction of the design. So like you may design something for the client, but if there's no communication between the contractor and even the architect, it may feel like that the architect has this certain vision in their head, but the contractor, like, well, if you want to do it that way, it's going to cost you an extra $100,000 to have the fireplace there versus 3 feet to the right for
Sure.
whatever reason. Maybe not to that extreme, but is that is that true? And how can somebody prevent that from happening almost?
Yeah. Well, what we do, we call design build. And so during those initial concepts, um, you can we analyze it for construction as well, since we're builders as well. We don't build
Mhm.
all our projects. We'll only build about 10% of our projects, but even the ones we don't build, we'll be thinking about the how it's going to be built. But you can also do that. An architect can do that with a contractor. And so during those initial concept sketches, you can show it to a contractor, and he can give you feedback on those kind of things. He say, "Hey, wait a second, that fireplace is in a complete wrong position, and let's move it over here." And so in that initial concept sketches, you can make adjustments with a contractor, and he can something that we'll also do is give feedback on costs at that initial concept stage. We'll start off with some cost per square foot
Yeah.
conceptual costs, and then as we move forward, we'll get into some line item costs, which meaning the framing costing so much, the concrete's costing so much, and then a contractor could do that too. And so a contractor coach you on the construction costs as you're designing, not wait till after the design's done, and then and all your work, all this huge amount of work is put into the drawings, the engineering, and everything, and then the
Mhm.
contractor comes back and says, "Oh, this is going to cost you this," and you become shocked, and the project oftentimes is dropped, or you have to go back to the drawing board and redesign it, and so I learned that from experience. That I ran into that many times, and I said, "This is not working. I got to figure out." I want to tell my clients right off the bat, hey, we think it's going to cost this much, and so they can make a decision. Okay, let's make it smaller, or sometimes they'll just not do the project at all, and so
Which is
we
almost better because now you've conserved a relationship.
yeah, and I haven't spent their money, doing all this work, and then have it fall apart at the end. So
Yeah. So let's go back. So now you've gone through the planning process, you've gone through the building process, they sign off on it. Does that mean that you can start building, or what goes on after those two?
yeah, once you have your sometimes you'll have a grading permit ahead. You can do that's a separate department. Public Works will give you a grading permit ahead of time,
Hmm.
ahead of the building permit, and so you can do your grading maybe while it's in the plan check process. And so you do your grading first, and a lot of jurisdictions want to see the grading signed off and finalized before you pull your building permit. And so that would be the first thing. But then once you get your plans approved, there, there's what they call item B checklists in the County of Ventura and other places
Uh-huh.
where they'll want fees paid or school fees, and they'll want to see the contractor's license information, and there's some administrative things that are required for the final building permit. But then once you have your building permit, you can, and your grading signed off, you can start digging, foundations. And so,
Yeah. Now, at what point do you pay fees associated with it? Like, meaning at what point, like, is it after the building permits have been approved? And then what do those fees typically look like for a city, basically? Is it just is it school fees? Is it water fees? What are the different fees associated with that at that point?
yeah, again, every jurisdiction's different. And so, if you're in, like in the city of Ventura, they have some special development fees and park fees, and County of Ventura has traffic mitigation fees sometimes that you have
Mm-hmm.
to pay. They're not big fees, but so there is plan check fees. So when you first submit the plans and the planning and the building and safety and all these different jurisdictions, they want a fee up front, but then to pull the permit, they want another fee. Not so much for planning, but for like all the other departments, they have a permit fee, and you pay that fee, and then the building and safety, before you can pull your building permit fee, though, that there is all these other fees that may be attached on top of that. The school fee is one of them. That's kind of a given. Depending on the school district, how much they charge, but it's like $3 a square foot or something like that is what they charge
Mm-hmm.
for the school fees. Yeah.
And then, what are these fees like? If somebody wants to build a house, let's say it's a 2,500 square foot house, like what can they expect? Like, and I'm not asking for a breakdown, or maybe architecture fees, like versus like city fees and permitting fees,
Mhm.
like $10,000 for permit fees, $10,000 for architecture. So you're probably looking at 20 to 30. What are some of the ranges in Ohio or Ventura County, just so that people have an idea? Because a lot of times they're considering building and they're thinking like, oh, I'm going to save all this money. But once you factor in a lot of the stuff, it actually comes out to very similar. Yeah, maybe you get to build the house that you want, but it comes out to similar or even more, and there's substantial more risk associated with sometimes the
Yeah.
entire process.
Yeah. People like oftentimes don't. They think, oh, we can build this house for X amount, but they don't consider what we call soft costs, which is actually the architect's fee and the city fees and permit fees and all that. And so their soft costs, I would say they can range up to like 10% of the construction costs of the project is what
So if it's a
usually.
$1 million house that they're building, like maybe like a hundred
Right.
thousand, great. Okay, and then here's the last question: any tips for somebody looking to potentially build a house and looking to go through the permit process as to best practices, or maybe even some challenges that they should watch out for when going through this process?
Um, well, everything we talked about, the challenges. It's a very complicated process, and so yeah, having a professional kind of uh, shepherd you through the process is important. There's also, besides architects, there's some of these planning, processing outfits that's all they do is process these permits for people, and so getting a hold of one of them to help you through the process and checking all the check. There's a big long checklist that you need to go through and get everything squared away so you don't not waiting and uh, trial and error kind of thing by doing it yourself. Um,
And what are those companies called?
well, they're permit expediters, or
Okay.
that's they're supposed to get your permit faster. That's why they call it expediters. Sometimes not so much, but they do relieve the load. We'll hire them sometimes too, just kind of relieve our load, especially when we're dealing with commercial projects. They get even more complicated. We'll bring in a planning, this guy, a permit expediter or a planning expert, I guess you'd call them as well, and they would just help you through everything what we're talking about through the permit process. They would, they kind of we do that in house ourselves, but there, a lot of people will hire these guys.
Now, here's the last question that I have. Like, let's say a homeowner hires an architect, and this happened to me where during the pandemic, I felt like I was getting the runaround from the architect. It was for accessory dwelling units, and they kept saying, "Oh, like the city hasn't gone back to me, or the city's not responding to me, or this is not going on." Is there a way for consumers to get the status of their own project? Because what we ended up finding out is that in some cases, the plans were already given, supposed to have been given back to the architect for pickup and for revisions, and they were sitting there for 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks at a time without the architect picking them up. So is there a way that as a consumer you can kind of have a little bit of checks and balances? Because I think that where I failed is I didn't understand the building process. I didn't know there was planning, and I didn't know there was building. So when I started hearing where they were at, it was just confusing. So it was easy for me to be somewhat gullible. Is there a way for a consumer to be able to kind of check on the status of their own projects, to be able to make sure that whoever it is that they hire, that they're on top of the ball versus kind of waiting 3 to 4 weeks to pick up some plans, and then another 3 to 4 weeks to do revisions, and then another couple months to get them back sometimes, you know?
Yeah, I think it just depends on your involvement. Um, you can go down there with your architect to do the plan submittal, and then kind of be on the list of who they contact when the plans are ready to be picked up. And so
I love it.
they can notify you as well as the architect to say, hey, the plans are complete. And so you're aware that, that things should be moving forward, and check on your architect or draftsman or whoever's doing your plans to make sure that they're on top of it as well. But yeah, some people just don't want to be involved that much, and so they kind of just you have to trust in who's doing your work. But if you want to get in there and be more hands on, I mean that'd be a way to do it.
Well, I think as long as you have the right person, you can be completely hands off. Any tips on hiring the right person, basically?
Yeah, get referrals. Talk to other people who've worked with that person, and see how what their experience was. Yeah, and there used to be the Better Business Bureau, didn't there? And I don't think there are those people anymore. But yeah, all my work comes through word of mouth, and so I get people that's who refer me. A lot of times it's the real estate agents or people like that. But it's just you find out by talking around. Like just ask questions. Talk to your real estate agent. Who do you recommend, and that sort of thing.
Yeah. Any final words for our viewers as it relates to how to obtain a building permit or the building permit process when building a house?
Oh, well, just be patient. It can, these days it's just taking forever. After the epidemic, things still haven't got back to normal where it was before. Whether or not it does or not, not sure. But it's just a long process these days. And enjoy the process. And so don't get too frustrated if it takes too long. Just kind of understand that that it's the way the world is now, and try to enjoy the creative process. That's what I enjoy about my work. All this paperwork stuff is like my least favorite part of it. It's just kind of like I said, I'm in the service industry, and so it's what I do. But the creative process and 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 designing that dream home or that whatever the addition is, make it special, like we talked about. Make it so you're investing in yourself, and how you live, and how you turn out as a person in that project.
Yeah, wonderful. Okay. Anything else, or I think that's pretty much it, Mark. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to say thank you. Or here's the last thing. If somebody wanted to get in contact with you or somebody wanted to hire your firm, what would be the best way for them to do that?
You go to my website, Whitman Architectural Design, or we're on the yellow pages or white pages. Yeah, I don't always have this thing on. I had a little surgery in my nose. They took off a little what they call basal thing. So excuse my creepy appearance here, but yeah, I'd be happy to. Like I said, we'll for most projects we'll come out and do an initial consultation for free. just show us your project and we'll tell you what, we think. And so, yeah, I love my work and love to talk to you about it.
Sounds great. All right. For all our viewers out there, we had Marc Whitman on the podcast today. He went over how to obtain a building permit or building permit process for building a house. Once again, my name's Jose Luis Morales. I'm your host of the Morales Group Show. If you've enjoyed this episode, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you feel that this episode would be helpful to somebody, make sure to hit that share button. And looking forward to sharing more valuable content with you guys. Thank you so much. And thank you, Marc, once again.
All right. Thank you.